This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It is 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And we will return, I think, immediately to the vexed territory of the Middle East. And we will be edging towards, if you want to get in early, the question of what you and I don't want other people to feel excluded, but I think there's been a bit of a bent on the show in the last few times that we've addressed this issue towards people who are very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. And although personally I think it would be very difficult to offer them unqualified support for the course that they have followed recently, I worry that some people have been squeezed out of the conversation a little bit. And those would be people who are passionately concerned about the future of Israel itself, and their answer to the question of what Benjamin Netanyahu should do was somewhat missing from yesterday's programme and much of the conversation that I have witnessed. So I'm going to try that in a moment. It may not work. You may not have the appetite to contribute. But the constituency of people I describe used to be an absolute staple of LBC phone-ins. And it's another mark of just how profound a shift in public opinion and indeed public discourse has been affected since probably before the October the 7th terror attack, but particularly since the October the 7th terror attack. It wasn't helped, of course, by the clumsiness of the last Labour leadership, but the conflation of criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism appears to be in abeyance. So that there seems to be a deeper understanding that it is quite possible to do one without even flirting with the idea of doing the other. And that's a change. And in a way, it's bad news and good news for people committed to the nation of Israel. It's bad news and good news. It's bad news because it means the conversation becomes a little more detailed and a little more nuanced. I read in one newspaper this morning a description of a graffito that says, "Think about Gaza." Think about Gaza as a graffito. And that was described as being anti-Israel. And I thought that doesn't really land anymore. I mean, you might get commissioned by the Daily Mail to write that. But and I say this, I hope, with some wisdom, but it just doesn't land anymore, does it? The idea that the simple reminder to think about Gaza at this moment, when famine is imminent and deaths are already running into the tens of thousands, is somehow an anti-Israel comment. That I think would have gone almost unnoticed 12 months ago. Whereas now, I'm afraid it sticks out like a sore thumb as a silly attempt to conflate one phenomenon with another. It is 7 minutes after 10. So I've explained to you repeatedly, and I know it's a bit like banging your head against a brick wall sometimes, and I know that some people find it quite an obnoxious position, or at least an unsustainable position. But for me, very personally, the state of Israel and its unique status on the world stage is intrinsically linked to what happened in Europe, in continental Europe, in the 1940s. And I know that the moves towards founding a homeland, I know that the foundations of the modern state of Israel were laid before the Holocaust, but the Holocaust necessitated, in the eyes of the world, or in the eyes of the Allies, in the eyes of the victors in the Second World War, it necessitated the creation of a safe, what we would call these days, a safe space, a safe haven. And to be committed to that, even now, is to me both the humane and the humanitarian position. I am familiar with the history of the area. I am familiar with the removal of people who were living there at the time. I do not think this is a binary issue. The idea that was somehow justifiable is not something I can necessarily support. I wish it could have been undertaken in a more equitable manner. The phrase that always stings most for me is the question or the line I read by one of the key politicians of the era who talked about a land without a people for a people without a land. Now, had that been completely true, then we wouldn't today be contemplating the slim possibility of World War III kicking off in that land or in that region, because it wasn't a land without a people. It was a people without a land, but it wasn't a land without a people. So 9 minutes after 10 is the time. So what do you want Benjamin Netanyahu to do? What do you, as somebody who is perhaps as a consequence of what I've just described, and remember, what I've just described is the product not just of the Holocaust, but of generational trauma, of persecution and pogrom and centuries, if you like, of it's not homelessness as such, but it's a life lived perilously. It's a life lived in the knowledge that the persecution could begin again and you would have to flee. It's the knowledge that tolerance, welcome, warmth is only ever, potentially only ever temporary. And you need to understand this, and you need to grasp this in order to understand, even to begin to understand, Israel. And it is people who are part of what I've just described. It is people who feel that haven, that sense of homeland, who know that even if you still live in Western Europe, you may have a metaphorical suitcase permanently packed under your bed. I remember the first time you told me that your grandparents kept some of their assets in gold bullion, because it was easily transferable. And at the time, I think I kind of thought, oh, that's a bit of an overreaction. I was very naive when I started doing this job. It's a bit of an overreaction. You're never going to have to flee this country again. But then you look at the rise of a politician like Donald Trump or Viktor Orban in Hungary, and you realize that actually the mode of politics that will identify a part of the population and use them to further their own political ends to the point of complete alienation and persecution it can happen at any point in history, anywhere in the world. So, and history has taught us that it is more likely to happen to Jewish people than anybody else. And therefore, that commitment to the modern state of Israel is both a necessary and natural position for Jewish people. And support for it, as a consequence of sympathy and solidarity with Jewish people, is also a natural and, for me at least, a necessary position. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be critical, doesn't mean I'm not going to call out atrocities when I think they are being committed by Benjamin Netanyahu's government, but fundamental to that understanding is this sense of safe haven. And it's with that phrase in mind that I want you to tell me what you want the Israeli government to do next. Because if we were to prioritize a safe haven for Jewish people across or above every single other element of this conversation, which we haven't done until this point. Yesterday there were in the short-term political reality, there were more important questions to ask. But we haven't prioritized this question. If you were to prioritize the safe haven, the status of Israel as an almost supernatural safe haven for Jewish people, then I don't have a Scooby-Doo what you would want Netanyahu to do. I can't think for a minute that there is a consensus here. Do you want him to retaliate against Iran to the express disapproval of the biggest allies Israel has ever had in the rest of the world, most obviously the United States of America, but also, of course, the United Kingdom? Or do you think that the future of Israel, the future security of Israel, would be better served by Netanyahu getting further into bed with the far-right members of his own government who are agitating, of course, for violence? And bearing in mind there are members of Netanyahu's government who called in the first week of this conflict for nuclear bombs to be dropped on Gaza, who are quite happy expressing the view that there are no innocent people in Gaza, even ones that have been born since the conflict commenced. So it's I don't think this is simple, but I think it's important to hear from people who who are living in a form of existential threat, who feel that historical haven is probably more precarious now than it has been, well, for decades, certainly for years. What would you like Netanyahu? What do you think Netanyahu should do? And as ever on this program, there'll be two questions here. What do you think Netanyahu should do? And what do you think Netanyahu will do? And I think that the best analysis is that choice between two coalitions. You have an international coalition, which is urging caution, which is urging restraint. And then you have the domestic coalition, which is urging retaliation, which is urging revenge. I think it breaks down to that. And again, as ever on this program, you are not just welcome, but actively encouraged to pick any holes you can, any holes you please in my own sincere, but no doubt profoundly flawed analysis. Retaliation probably inevitable. Israel's most senior general, he will be, I think, part of the domestic coalition I'm trying to describe, adamant that there will be a response to Iran's missile and drone attack. It's still very unclear what form it will take. And crucially, and this is why the topic is the single most important topic in the world at the moment, it is still unclear whether it would be forceful enough to tip the worsening violence, writes one newspaper this morning, into a full-scale regional war. So in a way, I'm even asking whether or not a commitment to the status of Israel now as a historical haven for Jewish people would be better served or worse served by a full-scale regional war, by Israel acting in a way that is likely to tip the violence into a full-scale regional war. Because how the hell do you answer that question? What would be better for Israel? A continuing stalemate, as it were, a continuing knife edge, or to read the first paragraph on the front page of The Guardian today, action that would be, quotes, forceful enough to tip the worsening violence into a full-scale regional war. And I want, in the first instance, and we will throw this open further, in the first instance, I want you to talk to me as somebody for whom the status of the modern state of Israel as a historical haven, as a response to and perhaps a consequence of the Holocaust, as a unique historical creation, a unique geopolitical creation to which Jewish people, for the first time in their history, or certainly for the first time in their post-New Testament history, Jewish people can know that there is somewhere in the world where they will, if not be safe, then at least be safe from their own countrymen in a way that they weren't, of course, in Poland in the last century, or in France, or, God, in Germany, or almost anywhere else in occupied Europe. So somewhere where uniquely Jewish people have known for 80 years, give or take, that there is somewhere in the world we can go. If it all kicks off again, there is somewhere in the world we can go where we will be safe from our own neighbours. And I mean literal neighbours, not geographical neighbours. So if you are in that category, I want you to tell me what you want Netanyahu to do next. Do you want him to risk full-scale regional war? Or do you want him to demonstrate the restraint that Israel's allies around the world, including yesterday in this studio, David Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, or do you want him to show the restraint that the rest of the world is urging? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and the time is 10:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where as the world urges Benjamin Netanyahu to show restraint, to stay his hand, and his most senior general says that a response, a retaliation is inevitable, but it is unclear what that retaliation would be. How do you, as somebody for whom the survival of the modern state of Israel is a matter of personal existential angst. How do you want the Israeli Prime Minister to behave? Let's start with Avi, who is in Ra'anana in Israel itself. Ravi, what would you like to say? Avi, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I think finally, in all your analysis, you brought up a really important point, that Israel is the safe haven. I'm a British-born Jew from London who moved here 13 years ago, and I know existentially I might be safer in London, but I don't have control over my own security. Here, even though, if Iran wants to wipe us all out tomorrow, it's much easier if all the Jews come to Israel and he sends a nuclear bomb. But at the end of the day, we're in control of our own destiny. And I think what Netanyahu has to do, you asked that question, what would I like Netanyahu to do? I don't want to be in a war with Iran, right? My kids slept in a bomb shelter that night. There's nothing more fearful, and I don't think people truly appreciate and understand what it's like to be told that there are 300, missiles and UAVs and ballistic missiles on the way to you, and, potentially no one knows what the result of that's going to be. I think Netanyahu should have attacked immediately at the same time, so Iran can't just say, okay, we're done now, we threw our punch, we're done. That's not how this part of the world works. I think you have to project strength. We have to show the world, yes, you can ask us for restraint, but what guarantees do we have? And you're going to argue, well, we're the warmongers here, but at the end of the day...
No, I'm not. Don't tell me what I'm going to argue. I mean, just pause for a moment to reflect upon what you've already said, because you have rendered the Iranian response to the attack upon the consulate in Damascus both necessary and right under your own analysis of how that part, in your own words, how that part of the world works.
Well, I think the attack on the consulate, I think you have to look at in context as well. So you're talking about an attack that was not on the embassy. It was on the IRGC building next to it, which was being run by the military.
You heard what Keir Starmer...
Which was being used to plan further attacks on us.
Yes.
So
the Iranian attacks upon military positions in Israel were okay then?
Well, I think if you want to start a war, yes.
No, but Israel attacked under your analysis. I mean, the distinction between the consulate building and the neighbouring building is, for some people, it's moot. But as Keir Starmer pointed,
I'm not sure why you're focusing on that point, though.
Well, because
clearly proven.
Yes, go on.
James, it's clearly proven that the October 7th massacres were funded, directed by Iran. It's clear that Iran is...
It's clear that Iran is a supporter of Hamas. But I was just, literally, and we'll continue with your broader analysis, I was just pointing out that your phrase, that is how things have to be done in that part of the world, could equally apply to Iran responding to the attack upon on their territory in Damascus, as it could to Israel responding to the attack upon their territory in Israel. So I don't want to say convince me or persuade me, because that trivializes the broader conversation. But explain to me why risking, I have to say, a full-scale regional war. That phrase is now being bandied about quite casually in all of the analysis. Why you think risking a full-scale regional war would serve your need and desire, your right even, to safety better than restraint?
Well, you have a country in Iran being run by Islamic fundamentalists who are sworn to the destruction of Israel, who have been stating this and working actively towards it for the last 30 years.
Yes.
So my question is, what better serves my safety, to continue that until they have nuclear weapons, or to say, yeah, it's going to be really, really terrible. I'm going to have to live through a war.
You've gone a little further.
I have 4 children here.
No, I
don't
hear
want to live through a war, right? I don't want to live through a war. But I also know as a Jew, and I've seen my history over the last 2,000 years, and I've walked through the camps of Auschwitz. I know how this ends. I know how this ends if we don't stand up and fight for ourselves. I know how it ends when the world turns around and says, yeah, you know what, we'll look after you. It didn't happen 75 years ago in living memory. My grandmother, who had to escape on the Kinder transport, always turned around to me and said, "Better the world tells us tells us off after we defend ourselves." But we can't live by those guarantees anymore.
So no, hang on.
Are we going to hang around until Iran has a nuclear weapon?
I don't know. I mean that is a very, very powerful point that you make. So but you've gone a little further than I understood when you said that Netanyahu should have responded immediately. You want Israel to declare war on Iran and seek the annihilation of the ruling regime in Tehran. And I have to remind you, Avi. Hang on. Hang on. I have to remind you of the civilian casualties that would obviously entail. But that's what you want.
No, that's not what I want.
Sorry, carry on.
I don't want a regional war. I want the Iranian people to stand up and get rid of the Ayatollah.
Yeah, but the question is, what do you want Netanyahu to do? The question is, what do you want Benjamin Netanyahu to do? Not what do you want the Iranian people to do? The Iranian people, who, of course, in the main, are both opposed to and repressed by the regime of the Ayatollahs. But that's not the phone-in. The phone-in today is, what do you, as someone who fits perfectly the caucus of people I want to hear from first today, what do you want your Prime Minister to do?
I want him to ensure that he does everything he possibly can.
I mean actions, things we can measure and describe, not wishes, but actions.
I think that he uses the international pressure to impose every single sanction possible on Iran.
But the international pressure at the moment is urging restraint from him. So what do you want him to do in the context of the response to the attack this weekend? When the general says there will be a retaliation, but it remains unclear what form the retaliation would take, and it remains unclear whether or not it would be forceful enough to tip the worsening violence into a full-scale regional war, what do you want that retaliation to look like, to be?
I want it to set back the nuclear program in Iran.
So what would that involve, Avi? I feel like we're dancing on pinheads here. What do you want them to blow up or attack or nothing, something, anything?
I don't know the military options available, but what I do know is that unless the world can give us proper guarantee that instead of Biden sending $9 billion, right, which he did to the Ayatollahs just before October 7th, you know, there's an incredible Economist article from September.
I am kind of really clear about what I'm asking today, and I fully accept that you say you're not really qualified to answer it. But I also sense there's a reluctance, perhaps, to speak in slightly vaguer terms. I mean, you do, because you said, I wish Netanyahu had attacked Iran straight away, which would be a declaration of war, wouldn't it?
Well, how is sending 300 UAVs and ballistic missiles not a declaration of war?
Well, because as Iran has sought to explain, and you can agree with them or disagree with them, that it was a sort of muscle flexing exercise that killed precisely nobody.
And it only precisely killed nobody through basically an incredible defence that no one knew would happen.
Well, hang on, and the 72-hour warning.
If we destroy the nuclear reactor,
but I wanted to learn from you today.
Injure anyone, is that not a declaration of war? Then that's fine. That's great.
Yes.
I'd like us to.
But as you said yourself, none of us know how feasible that is. I mean, as a general rule, blowing up nuclear reactors is quite hazardous, I think.
Yeah,
but I hear you. So we're not going to reach a point. We're not going to reach a point where you can say, I want him to do, and that probably highlights the difficulty that the government has in defining or describing what retaliation would actually look like. But if it is another round of cyber attacks or assassinations, that won't be enough for you. You want something more substantive than that. You want something that damages the capability of Iran to inflict real damage on Israel.
I think right now what we're doing, if we do nothing, is the same as what we've been doing with Hamas for the last 10 years, and we saw how that ended on October 7th.
Yes,
so
I know not what, but it must be the terror of the earth, as King Lear might put it.
I think we need something that serves two purposes. One, reminds the region that we're not the punching bag. Two,
I think that's pretty clear.
Sets the Ayatollahs back to the point where the people of Iran can start the uprising that they need, and 3 has the global consequences on that.
And this would involve Netanyahu ignoring the global pressure for restraint, and that is a risk, I suppose. Although history teaches us that the support might be temporarily diminished, but it would never disappear altogether. Thank you, Avi. 10:31 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. If you're new to the programme, I do this occasionally just to highlight the difficulty of the conversation from my point of view. But I don't make a habit of it, but it is a constant. It will run through any discussions about these matters, like Blackpool through a stick of rock. So 2 texts come in response to the same half an hour of radio that you have just listened to, and these 2 people have listened to the same conversation that you have listened to. The first says, James, why are you always so soft on Israel apologists? And the second says, James, why don't you just tell this guy that you hate him because of his religion? So the 2 people there who heard exactly the same conversation. And although I find that fascinating, it's also quite depressing. And speaking of conflicting opinions, let me read you this text. Dear James, as a London Jew who lived in Israel for 11 years and then returned to London, I think the friends I have in Israel are against Netanyahu's government, but at the same time terrified that they face an existential threat. I think the people who want to show strength, and this I think is a response to Avi's call, are utterly naive because they are going to turn Israel into a war zone. But that might be the thing, if you like, that people like Avi think makes Israel safer. Barbara's in Havant in Hampshire. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning.
Hello,
this is
Barbara.
A very tricky issue to talk about.
You can say that again, Barbara.
I've almost got to the point that I can't listen to the radio anymore.
Yes.
I'm a 74-year-old Jewish person. I'm an atheist, but my culture is Jewish. I know pretty much all there is to know about the Holocaust. I've read about it. I can't do it anymore, but I read about it. I felt it. I feel it every day. My mother's generation, my father's generation had most of their family wiped out in the Holocaust. Yeah. What I would like Netanyahu to do is what he, of course, won't do, because he's caught up in some trance of fear and hatred, and he can't react with his thinking brain. He's reacting with his emotional brain. I would like him to explain that there is no security for Israel. There is no safe haven for Jews in Israel unless there is a safe haven for the other party involved historically in that part of the world, and that is the Palestinians. Most of what I dismay to see grown-ups, Netanyahu, the guys in Iran, the guys at Hamas, behaving like 2-year-olds, stamping their feet, can't get what they want. I'll do this to you. Oh, I'll do that to you, and you'll do that to me. It's so pathetic. It is pathetic. Now, I know people will say, oh, you're just naive. What do you know? Go away with your childish thoughts. But my childish thoughts won't end up in us blowing half the bloody, excuse my language, world up. No. Their childish thoughts will. We cannot. The lesson of the Holocaust is not only that the Jews should have a safe place to live. That is one of the lessons. The lesson of the Holocaust is that we don't other some other people in order for our benefit. We have to treat everybody with respect and understand their fears, their traumas. Otherwise, we will not get anywhere, and we aren't getting anywhere. We're going backwards. Now, and Netanyahu, if he were a responsible leader and not someone who's hell-bent of staying out of prison, as I understand it, on corruption charges, he would say to his people, I know what you want. You want to hit out because you've been attacked, and that is awful. But I tell you what you need, and I need, is to think, is to sit down, is to think calmly, is to try and get away from my reaction of fear and anger and try and think in the long term what is going to benefit all of us, because until we benefit all of us, we aren't going to benefit Jews. The state of Israel will be perpetually in turmoil because it cannot.
So there's a naivety then attached to the idea that Israel can bomb its way to safety, as it were.
I think there is.
Well, what about this, if I may? Well, thank you, Barbara. The naivety of thinking that even if a settlement for the Palestinian people was reached, even if they were to enjoy the sort of freedoms that most of the world, or certainly that we here take for granted, freedom of movement, freedom of all the freedoms that they currently lack, even if that were somehow established via a two-state solution, the dedication of the Iranian regime to the destruction of Israel would be undimmed. I mean, neither of us know either way, but you're putting your eggs in the basket that says that wouldn't.
I would, realistically, I would think that the extremely unpleasant people also caught in their fear and trauma and nastiness who run Iran will also, will probably continue. But if we had a better solution for Palestinians, maybe the message wouldn't get through so easily. Maybe because people were able to go about their lives.
Because you could say to the Iranian warmongers or the Iranian anti-Semites, you could simply say, well, why? The Palestinian people are content now, or the settlement has been reached, so why do you remain dedicated to the destruction? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. And this just cannot go on. We cannot just have people behaving like 3-year-olds in the playground. And for me, it's like a personal thing. If you as a person are caught in fear and trauma, you need to deal with it. Otherwise, you will probably destroy yourself and good chance of destroying lots of people around you.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there was a text that came in that I hadn't fully understood, and I wasn't sure. But you've just made it crystal clear to me. So Nick texted, I think in response to the first caller today, James, he said some nice comments about the show, but I'll spare you those. Please bear in mind that traumatized people can lose frontal cortex function. They will not be able to think as you can. This guy is terrified. That's kind of where you started your point,
exactly,
isn't it?
Saying
Gosh.
that. And it's happening on national levels.
Yes.
And that's why it's so... That's why the whole thing is so dangerous, and that's why I would recommend national therapy, if you see what I mean, where everybody looks at the fear and the trauma and thinks, is this really the best I can do as a human being to try and achieve my security and safety at the expense of other people? Is this actually going to work?
And now, would we be saying this if we lived in Israel? I appreciate your connection to it is profound and personal, but would we be saying this if we had to stow our children in a bomb shelter? There are people in Israel.
There are people saying this in Israel. There are many people saying it. They're not getting a voice at the moment, probably, and probably even their sort of viewpoint is being shattered because they're living in fear. Who wants to have 300 drones and ballistic missiles at you?
Yes.
Yeah, but we will never get rid of this cycle of trauma and fear
until a settlement is reached. And I'm reminded of the words of, I think Charlotte tells me that this is what Golda Meir said: the old will die and the young will forget. And I think that's not going to happen, is it?
No, especially after this last round of craziness.
Yeah.
And I don't. And here is where I go full utopia.
Go on.
I don't believe in a two-state solution. I believe in a one-state solution because I'm an atheist.
Yes.
I don't care what I would like. A land where both Palestinians and Jews can live together, share resources, share whatever there is there. We don't have to major on religion. It hasn't really done most people an awful lot of good, especially recently. That's what I would advocate. I know it's never going to happen, but that's what Barbara would do.
That's what Barbara would do. Under Barbara's glorious rule that many people listening would be quite happy to live under. I have to push back slightly at the last point because the status of the modern state of Israel as the place where Jews are safe from their neighbours is crucial to my analysis, and I know that you're being idealistic, but the history of persecution and pogrom, and yes, of course, you can't separate that from the history of religion, but I don't think that is feasible, is it, against the backdrop of generational trauma?
Probably not. No, probably not.
But we can hope.
Oh, that it were,
Oh, that it were, Barbara. Oh, that it were. And I can tell you, unsurprisingly, that my inbox is overflowing with praise and admiration for your position. Except John in Godalming, who's been in touch to say, are we only going to hear from Jews today? I don't know, John, but what a strange place your mind must be to even think those words, let alone go to the trouble of writing them down and pressing send. Barbara, take care. Thank you. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. A tone lightener, although Barbara has brought quite a lot of light and joy into the... look, for picking me up on how to pronounce Godalming. Forgive me. I felt that the anti-Semitism on display in that text was probably more pertinent than the correct pronunciation of the locale, but nonetheless, you're quite right. These things need to be pointed out. I've got quite a good woke watch, although it involves a little bit of work, and I've got a truly extraordinary unhinged headline. I think we'll go with the unhinged headline at this point, but remind me to do the woke watch before home time as well.
Unhinged headline.
True British patriots have gas boilers and petrol cars. That headline has appeared in the Daily Telegraph today. I shall read it to you again. It's by someone called Jill Kirby. True British patriots have gas boilers and petrol cars.
Unhinged headline.
And there's a peach of a woke watch on the way as well. Donald Trump has demonstrated his anti-woke credentials in the most powerful way possible. And I will share the most incredible. I'm normally a critic of Donald Trump, but if you want someone to prove that they're anti-woke, what Donald Trump did yesterday is absolutely gold standard. And I'll share that with you shortly as well. But back to the rather more important question of what people who prioritize the future safety of Israel want the current Prime Minister of Israel to do next. And it is in response to the Iranian attack upon Israeli soil this weekend. The international community urges caution and restraint. The domestic coalition, the government that allows him to retain his grip on power even as his personal popularity diminishes, are essentially dedicated to the opposite course of action. So what do you think best serves the interests of a peaceful future for Israel? Jill's in Rugby. Jill, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. Good to talk to you.
Likewise.
Okay, so just a bit of background. So my husband is Israeli. My kids were born there. We lived there for a long time, but lots of family there still. And so I think the question has to be more about what he needs to do rather than what we want him to do, or I want him to do, or my family want him to do.
Same thing, sure, probably. But yeah, I mean, draw whatever distinction you want, Jill.
Yeah. So as your first caller, I think his name's Avi, was saying, when you live in Israel and you start to understand the mindset of how things work in the Middle East, I think that's a really valid point, because it's about the message that it sends to Iran in terms of strength and power and steadfastness in their belief to secure their nation. And as your previous caller just said, that lady that was speaking, there is a collective trauma. And he is coming from an emotional point of view, but I think the whole country of Israel is coming from an emotional point of view. And I can completely relate to that and vouch for it in terms of all the people that I am connected to.
I know you're not glossing over that, but you're looking at some fairly hefty generational trauma in Gaza at the moment as well, aren't you, for future generations? That was more Barbara's point, I think.
Yeah, and there is that. That's not to diminish their.
No, I'm not suggesting for a minute that you were. I'll get it in the neck if I don't point that out. And also the reality of the missiles and actually landing and killing people needs to be contrasted with the deep trauma of the threat and the fear that Israel will have felt this weekend, as opposed to the casualties. But that's not to make light of either, because trauma is trauma. But what then, if I may push you slightly, what then do you think that response needs to look like?
I think it needs to be considered. I think it needs to be precise.
Well, we all think that. Because Avi wouldn't. I'm not. This isn't a criticism, and it may be that you don't know, but you've rung in.
I don't know.
So you've rung in to tell me that you don't know.
I'm torn between not wanting a full-scale regional war, as nobody does, but also really understanding the importance of Israel defending their country and maintaining their security.
Yes.
From an existential point of view, and this is a dichotomy. And that comes first for me. So
okay. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. So tell me if I'm wrong. If you could be persuaded that somehow a full-scale regional war would be the best case scenario for protecting the future of Israel, then you would reluctantly support a full-scale regional war.
I can't say that I would.
Well, I can't see how it would. If you see what I mean, because that's two callers. Callers now who are sort of flirting with support for a much more robust response from Israel, but not demonstrating any confidence at all, or being able to explain in any way how that would secure long-term safety for Israel. And then Barbara essentially saying you're never, ever going to have long-term safety until you've actually dealt with the plight of the Palestinian people.
Yes, I agree with that. But I don't necessarily
who Israel are currently bombing into oblivion. We can't keep ignoring that whopping great elephant in the corner of the room, can we?
Yeah, but we talked around the whole kind of.
So we don't know.
We don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answer to it. I wish I did have the answer to it, but I do know that first and foremost. Yes.
Oh, phone line's gone. But I typical of that. First and foremost, and then the phone line went after the thing. But yeah, I presume Jill said something about keeping front and centre the trauma of Israeli people, the generational trauma of Israeli people, which you can't even begin to get your head around. I find it so depressing to see people sometimes even arguing in good faith from a position of complete ignorance of what that means. What it means to have grandparents who kept bags packed, or parents who kept bags packed, or had some of their resources in gold bullion. Although Bella makes a complimentary point. My maternal grandfather, she writes, always kept some gold, but not in case they would have to flee Europe again, James, but rather flee Israel for Europe. This talks about the existential fear which is at the core of most Israelis, whether Holocaust survivors or natives. Tragically, young families like my sister's now feel this existential anxiety as a result of the Israeli government's actions rather than Israel's enemies. It's a desperate time for many, I would even say most people, who feel completely helpless and in grave danger because of reckless actions they can see no sense in. So Bella positing her own sister who lives in Israel as somebody who might feel compelled to flee Israel for their own safety, for Europe, something that her maternal grandfather was always aware of and therefore kept gold in his home in preparation for leaving Israel. Good Lord, as if it wasn't complicated enough already. Rufus is in Stanmore. Rufus, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm a member of the Israel Supporters Club because I've got parents, son and sister who live there. Two things that I think Netanyahu could do. Yeah. First of all, Israel has goodwill at this instant for a few seconds and could shout from the rooftops about the situation, the genocide that Iran would like to achieve. If you go back to pre-79, Israel was very friendly with Iran. There were El Al flights into Iran before the Ayatollahs came in.
Can we derive some optimism for it? Would it be naive to suggest that particular pendulum could swing back conceivably one day?
Well, yes, I think Netanyahu has been trying for a long time, the Israelis have been trying for a long time to help an Iranian grassroots revolution. And I think that may well have an effect. The Iranian people don't want this war. They are generally...
But do the Israeli people? That's the question I'm asking today.
No, I don't think they do, actually.
What do they want then? Or what do you want, Rufus? What do you want Netanyahu to do?
Well, first of all, to explain the position and then perhaps pick off a few Iranian baddies
Yeah.
And then I think the two-state solution is completely dead. If you understand the Israeli psyche, they are not going to give space, time, effort to a two-state solution. That's dead in the water since October the 7th.
So what's the alternative?
Well, Caroline Glick has proposed that anybody who is, say, should be called a Palestinian, could have Jordanian or Egyptian citizenship and then the right to live in Israel. And that would go back to your caller from Portsmouth, who would like everybody to live in peace there. So the Palestinians would have the right to live there, and if they lived in peace,
do you imagine if you were listening to the radio and somebody described the future of Jewish people in the Middle East in the way that you've just described the future of Palestinian people? We're going to give you the right to citizenship in Jordan or Egypt or Saudi or anywhere else you want to live, and you'll be able to live there as a citizen, but you can't have your own homeland.
Well, they do have a homeland. It's called Jordan.
Okay. Okay, mate. Take care. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We have a ruling in that Muslim student at the Michaela Community School. I'd like to build up some tension and say we'll talk live to Helen Hoddinott at the High Court after this. But this is, of course, the news bulletin, which will almost certainly contain the ruling that has just been handed down at the High Court. I minded. I never know whether these things work best as phone-ins before the ruling or after, and whether indeed they don't work at all once the ruling has already come in, because the ruling has already come in. So leave me to wrestle with these issues and problems while you prepare for the news headlines and to discover what conversation we are poised to have next. But thank you for that one. It was important, I think.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. It's certainly garnered an awful lot of attention, and the result is in. I speak of the Muslim student at the Michaela Community School who sought to sue her school after being prevented or told that she would no longer be able to pray in the playground. Helen Hoddinott is at the High Court. Helen, what's happened?
Well, as you say, James, this has been a highly publicised and controversial case with a Muslim pupil accusing a school of Islamophobia because of a prayer ban, and a school which says it is within its right to remain secular. The judge here at the High Court, in a written statement, has just ruled that while the school was wrong to exclude the claimant for 5 days after the controversy over this boiled over, the grounds that the prayer ban was discriminatory do not stand. The ruling sets out that while Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day, the pupil knew about the school's secular nature before attending, and she was able to perform qada prayers to mitigate the fact that she was not able to pray at the allotted time. Now, the story behind this case started in March last year when a pupil at the Michaela Community School in Wembley started praying in the playground using a school blazer because of a prayer mat ban already in place. The school has about 700 pupils, around 50% of whom are Muslim. It doesn't have a prayer room because the head teacher, Catherine Birbal Singh, says she doesn't want to separate pupils based on religion. But around 30 other pupils started praying in the playground alongside that first girl, and the school imposed a prayer ban. What followed, according to lawyers for the school, was a campaign of intimidation of the teachers, where they were called Islamophobic, threatened with violence, and started travelling to work in groups out of fear. The school then took the pupil then took the school to court, and in a 2-day hearing back in January, lawyers for the pupil alleged that the prayer ban was discriminatory and uniquely affects her faith. They said the stance was the kind of discrimination which makes religious minorities feel alienated from society, and her request was to be allowed to pray for around 5 minutes at lunchtime on dates when faith rules required it, but not during lessons. Now, lawyers for the school argued that its ban was justified and proportionate as a result of the threats that the teachers faced. And government guidance suggests that enabling Muslims to pray at prescribed times is advisable, but they're not actually legally required to do so or to provide a space for prayer.
So it's more nuanced than the headline allows. That was a brilliant analysis of some fairly complicated issues, Helen. Thank you so much. So advisable to let the child and her friends pray, but not legally required.
Yes, and the school already has in place things like a full vegetarian menu, because the head teacher says that she already wanted to promote a community which wasn't segregated at all by race or religion, and that this plays a part in it, and that she said it was up to their own discretion to make the school secular, and it was their right to, enforce those rules.
Do we know what happens now?
Well, they have they've got
school.
what they wanted at the school. I mean, I suppose that it will carry on as it was before. The head teacher says that this has taken a huge toll on the school. And so the kind of sentiment there, I'm sure people will be upset and feeling bruised by what's happened here at the High Court. But I suppose the head teacher will now take this ruling and want to just press ahead with the rules that she implemented over the last few years.
And finally, Helen, do we know why the suspension of the pupil was ruled wrong? The 5-day suspension.
A part of the ruling said that an investigation took place after some words were exchanged before the pupil was suspended, and perhaps the pupil hadn't been able to give her side of the story before that suspension was implemented.
Helen Hoddinott, live at the High Court, doing a splendid job there of covering all the twists and complications of this really strange story. Now, I wonder how your mind works. I'd like to talk about this. I'd like to talk about elements of this story next. But what's the question? What's the first thing that's popped into your mind? Can I make a suggestion? You might have found yourself imagining what would happen if the Daily Mail reported tomorrow that a Christian pupil had been prevented from saying the rosary in the playground during Lent. I suspect that the tone of the coverage would be rather different, for good or for ill. That was one of the thoughts that popped into my mind, but it wasn't the first thought. The second thought, perhaps a little uncharitably, was that as an attention-seeking teenager, I wonder how much of this teenager's motivation might have been at least informed or influenced by the levels of attention that she clearly received as a consequence of this confrontation. And the third one is a weird one, because the third one was, how do you impose this rule? What do you do if there are 30 children kneeling on their blazers during morning break saying prayers? You what do you do? I mean, I don't know if that is the beginning, the middle and the end of the phone-in. Teachers listening might have a view on this, because there is something quite chilling about the idea of children being sent home from school for praying, isn't there? The defence in court, the school's case that these pupils knew they were signing up for a secular school, seems to me to be strong, seems to me to be watertight, again with that tiny little caveat. How would it play in the British media if it was a Christian kid being prevented from doing a few rosaries every day during Lent? But the secular state of the school, the secular status of the school, seems to me to be a strong play. But secularism isn't anti-religious. So secularism is a-religious. It's simply a determination to keep religion out of public spaces. Officially, to keep it out of institutional constructions. And how you actually impose a rule like this is... Well, let's have a little talk about that first. It may not be the question that detains us until 12 o'clock. Would you... I've got some Islamophobia in front of me already. Funny, isn't it, that we had... some fairly base anti-Semitism in the first hour with John in Godalming, cross that we were talking to so many Jewish people. And already I've got someone on WhatsApp making Islamophobic comments about how you might prevent children from praying. I'll say that again, mate, just in case there are enough brain cells still operating in your noggin to register what you've become or what you are. You're sending in hate-filled comments in response to a story about children saying prayers. 11:11 is the time. Do you want to know how naive I am? I sort of work on the presumption that if you're listening to this program, then you're probably not a fully paid up member of the Billy Buncher numbers on Twitter with a lion avatar and a long history of complaining about embroidery on football shirts. But of course, lots of people getting in touch with really vicious Islamophobic suggestions of how you might deal with these children. I guess that is the nature of social media. But how would this work? How would you introduce this? 0345 6060 So I'm interested in the rights and wrongs of it, although it's a little bit more nuanced than some of the coverage allows. I thought Helen did a brilliant job of conveying that. But it now means that 30 pupils who will be, let's say they're there now in the playground, using their blazers as prayer mats, i.e. using their blazers to kneel on, are there now, and they are breaking school rules. What do you do as the teacher? What do the teachers do? And I don't think the prayer room defence works, or the prayer room suggestion works, because the school wants to be a place where there is no religion. Do you know what? I hadn't spotted this a moment ago, but Barbara in Haven't kind of preempted this conversation, didn't she? When she talked about the impossibility, perhaps, of peace in the Middle East as long as religion, she didn't quite say exists, but as long as it is the driving force for human activity, human action. The idea that religion, I think she said, it hasn't served us that well, has it, historically, as an engine of peace and harmony. But we're here again. It's in some ways it's the same thing. So this teacher, who's a bit strange in some ways, but I think has probably got this right. Catherine Birbal Singh wants a school where there is no room for religion. There is no room for religion. In this school, you can do all the religion you want when you're at home. And if you want to say your prayers privately or just take a quiet moment, you can. We're not going to provide a room for it because that would be a prayer room and that would introduce institutionalized religion to the school environment. As someone who was educated by monks at a Benedictine monastic school, I'm all in favour of schools that have no room for religion at all. I'm not just because some of the men that were masquerading as religious during my school days were child sex abusers and vicious men of the worst imaginable kind. Even the good men that were there, and there were some, even the good men that were there, I would say this sort of school shouldn't really exist anymore in the 21st century. And we didn't have particular levels of indoctrination. They were a little bit weird about abortion and contraception, but that was the 1980s. I presume they've moved on a bit now. So I do, as someone who, goes through periods of having faith and then not having it again, I don't want schools to have institutional religion on campus. But equally, I'm a big believer in freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. You don't have, school's probably the place where your freedoms were more curtailed than they were at any other point in your life. Freedom of not going to maths, for example, is not a freedom that most schools respect. Freedom of not having to play rugby when it's snowing was not a freedom that was respected at my school. But the tension between those two positions, I like the idea of a school that manages to remove religion from the curriculum, from the campus. And I also like certainly freedom of expression, and prayer is an expression. So those two phenomena have just crashed headlong into each other, which is why it ends up in the High Court. This is where you need the wisdom of Solomon, or at least a High Court judge. So what prevails? Freedom of expression or freedom of no religion, secularism? And the judge has come down on the side of secularism. I like it. But what I don't know is how the school handles this now. So come at this from whatever angle you want. 0345 6060 is the number that you need. I'm interested in the first instance of how you think the school should impose this rule. Because I've got images of kids being hauled up by their shoulders and sort of dragged across the playground for the crime of praying. It's a weird one, isn't it? Let's see if it can Let's see if we can reach parts, as we routinely try to do every hour, and indeed as we did on the last hour of this programme, we can reach parts that other radio programmes can only dream of. It's 11:17. The number you need is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 19 minutes after 11, and I kind of like this as a rule. You can't pray at school, but how the hell do you implement the rule? This, if you're just joining us, is in response to the High Court ruling in the last few minutes that the Michaela Community School in North London was perfectly within its rights to ban a pupil from praying at school. It's a little more complicated than that, but you'll have to pick up the pieces as we go. If you've just tuned in, I explained it all. Or I suppose you can use pause and rewind, can't you, on catch up. Mark's in Leek in Staffordshire. Mark, what do you reckon?
Well, as I was saying to your producers, or one of your producers, I was brought up as a Christian. I wouldn't say indoctrinated, but I was pushed through confirmation. But then now, I think, I look at my kids. I was talking to you last week, by the way, about hugging.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yes, of course. Go on.
But no, I don't think religion should form part of any kind of child's education. I think I'm in agreement with you, so you're not going to have a row with me. But it starts at home. It starts.
How do you implement this rule?
That's an interesting one.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what you're getting back to religion. I think it's just a case of every school is secular.
Yeah, you're not answering my question.
No, I know.
The rule is in place now. There's 30 kids kneeling on their blazers in the corner of the playground, and your job as the teacher is to stop them. What are you going to do?
I think you've got to stop them. You've got to talk to the parents. Sorry, you've got to talk. Yeah, sorry, you've got to talk to the parents. You've got to explain.
Parents approve. Parents approve.
Parents approve of that.
Of the praying.
No.
Parents want. I want my children to pray. What's wrong with praying, you heathen? That's what the parents say.
Yeah, but not in school. School's about education.
Yeah, but hang on. You're
School's
saying I've got to talk
learning.
to. I've told you what happens when you talk to the parents. So the ball's back in your park now. How are you going to implement this rule in the playground?
You just do. It's literally.
You just do. What is this? You're 50-odd years old, man. You can't just say that.
I know.
That's
Well,
like
thanks for that.
You'll be saying
I'm a
because
little
I
bit
say
older
so.
than you.
You'll be saying because I
thank
say
you.
so. I remember your age from the conversation we had about hugging.
Yeah.
There's 30 kids over there kneeling on their blazers.
Well,
they are not allowed to. What are you going to do?
What do you think?
What are you gonna...
I've listened to you.
What do you think? Get knotted. No, have it. It doesn't work like that, mate. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo. That's why we're having a phone in. In fact, Mark, how much would you bet that no one can answer this question between now and 12 noon?
I would bet absolutely nothing.
Really?
But I think no. I'd bet £1 million.
Yeah, I was going to say, make your mind up. I don't think you can. I mean, the school will obviously have to do something, but what, suspensions? And then they come back. I mean, kids. You can imagine what I was like as a schoolboy. I was like, I don't know if you've seen If, the Lindsay Anderson film, the Malcolm McDowell character in it. I'd love to think I was like that. In my own mind, I was. I rebel against anything, like James Dean in Rebel About a Cause. What are you rebelling at? What have you got? What are you rebelling against? What have you got? So this would be like amazing. I'd think I was a cross between Che Guevara and Mahatma Gandhi on this one. You think I'm going to come back? I've been suspended for a week. First day back. Everyone's watching in the playground. I march into the corner of the playground. I take my blazer off. I fold it up. I stick it on the ground and I kneel down again. You can't get expelled, or can you? And then you're in a country where you're expelling children from school for saying their prayers. That's some distance from Christopher Robin, isn't it? What's the line? What's the Christopher Robin line? It'll come to me in a moment. Thank you, Mark. Kim's in Leeds. Kim, what do you reckon?
I'm actually a religious education teacher and have been for 16 years. So I come from a place of inclusivity. I think we should learn about and from faith. Yes. And under the 1944 Education Act, the school will have an obligation to cover all world faiths.
Yes, but that's teaching. That's a lesson. That's a teaching about religion. That's not practicing religion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the school is secular. They've made that abundantly clear. They've got an inclusive vegetarian menu. Fantastic. We're also not picking up on the fact that the head teacher's surname is Singh. So they are already of the Sikh faith. So that's their heritage with that surname.
Yes.
I think it's really important that they're trying to be inclusive, which actually recognises equality. So what they've said is that prayer should be a private practice.
Yes.
Now, because I'm a faith teacher, I teach all the world faith. This young person will know the hadith, they'll know their faith, they understand the 5 pillars, and they know full well that there is gaps in the day where they can make up the prayers for their obligations. Both Shia and Sunni Muslims will know this. And my perspective as an educator and from their understanding of their faith is that this young person is being instructed, and also they're kneeling on their blazer. Their parents, they're not cheap. That'll be 50-odd quid.
This is it.
They're
A
doing
teacher
this.
speaks.
Yeah. So what's happening is they're like, don't bring your prayer mats in. They know the Islamic faith will give them an opportunity to catch up on their prayers elsewhere.
But what if it did? I'm not being devil's advocate. Do you know what I nearly asked you then a minute ago? It's so childish when you said I teach all the faiths. I wanted to say, what's your favourite? But that's how wars start. So don't answer that question. Whatever you do, but what if the faith didn't accommodate what you describe? What if there was, then you wouldn't sign up for that school in the first place, would you? And you'd tell them when you so sorry, if you need to pray every day at a given time in company while kneeling on your blazers, then this is not the school for you. But that would be religious discrimination.
It would be, but by acknowledging it, they do have World Faith Days. They have an obligation to mark certain periods and obviously give people, religious observance in the same way that we have for our employment. I think what's happened here is that this young person wants to practice their prayers. They can do it quietly elsewhere without causing a scene. And I'm pretty confident if you get some Islamic persons calling, they will be like, yeah, okay, this young person can
No, we will. So you
elsewhere.
think this is more an act of pupil disruptiveness than it is an act of religious devoutness?
Yeah, I do. And I think if you're taking a step back, by no means should a child, any person, be prevented from practicing their faith. And I think it's so important that people have that opportunity to have those freedoms. What's happening here is this person's come to a place of education and academia and bringing in their personal faith into a secular group of people where they're already trying to be illustrate equality and understanding from a perspective where everybody has that opportunity. They'll have. And what's happened is this one person has said, actually, I want to pray, and I'm going to pray, and I'm going to kneel on my blazer, and what I'm going to do is, because they're not allowing me to bring my prayer mat in, if any of the imams in the local area are hearing this, they'll be like, oh my goodness, this is not what we're about. We're a peaceful faith.
And
we're not causing disruption.
The protests and the reason why some of the teachers felt compelled to travel to school in cars together was because of protests outside against what the school was doing that were not being conducted by pupils. They were being conducted by adults. It's a brilliant contribution, Kim. I've got one final question for you, which I think you might be able to answer, actually, in which case Mike in Leek will owe me £1 million, which is nice. How are you going to do it? There's 30 kids over there in the playground, all kneeling on their blazers. You're in charge. You're taking break. You've got your bell or whatever it is these days, and it's your job to get them. So make it stop, Kim. Over to you.
Okay, to make them stop doing that, you can't. You can't stop. Sometimes you just have to allow them.
Right.
That's the issue. You can't stop it. What you'd have to do is you go, when you've finished, we're going to have a discussion with this later. If I could speak to you 30 people in the hall at this time, we're going to go through what your parents have signed up with regards to our contract with the school, why this is causing a disruption, what we can do going forward, and we're going to make sure that this happens. So continue with your prayers. We'll carry on. Sanctions will have to accommodate the behaviour policy because their parents have signed up to that behaviour policy in school. So if you get a detention, if you get a suspension, if you get an exclusion, your parents have already signed up to it. So they are already aware that that's going to be the outcome.
So it would be so you carry on doing this, it's an exclusion?
Yes, they know that.
But then we're back to me, the teenage rebel, coming back on the day, like Steve McQueen coming out of the cooler in the. I'm slightly romanticising my childhood here, Kim. But I'm Steve McQueen coming out of the cooler in The Great Escape, and I'm going straight back in again because the first thing I'm going to do at morning break is take my blazer off and kneel down.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. You're always going to get that. You're always going to get that. And you're going to look back and you're going to go, do you remember that 10 years ago when that kid did that in the playground?
Yes.
So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. So we don't know, but we do. We don't know, but we do know. When we do know, but we don't know. But there's a broad consensus so far that the school is absolutely within its rights to say, so we know praying, which I like, except for the suspicion. And I nearly said the knowledge, but I'll go with suspicion in the interests of balance. Was it Marlon Brando rather than James Dean who said, what are you rebelling against? What have you got? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I was both of them when I was a teenager, and Steve McQueen. And Malcolm McDowell if it was a Christian child, I don't know if you remember, there was a case some time ago about someone who worked for British Airways that has a no jewellery rule. That's it. Just no jewellery allowed if you work for British Airways. And she was told to take her crucifix off. And my goodness me, it was in my early days as a phone-in host, and I thought I'd made a terrible career error, because every other phone-in host I ever listened to was banging on about how this was the end of civilization as we know it. And don't even mention Jerry Springer, the opera. Goodness me, people seem to want to bring back hanging for blasphemy when Stuart Lee's opera, Jerry Springer, the opera, was doing the rounds. They even showed it on the telly. So if it was a Christian child whose freedom of expression was being curtailed in this way, I just think some of the conversation would be different. But it doesn't change what we feel, or what I feel, which is that the school is right on this occasion, up to the point where I can't for the life of me imagine how this rule would be effectively imposed. We've got a winner for the funniest tweet of the day. Simon's been in touch. He says, this one's tricky. We need the wisdom of Liz Truss. Instead, we've got Amelia Cox with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we discuss a Muslim student's losing of a legal challenge today against a school previously dubbed Britain's strictest. And the legal challenge was over a ban on prayer rituals as opposed to praying, which is quite an important distinction that a couple of our callers have very cleverly picked up on, particularly Kim in Leeds, who is herself a religious education teacher. Well, it's not called that anymore. How many different names has that had over the year? Divinity? It was called Divinity at one point. RI, religious instruction, religious education. What else? It's a few. Many other subjects have actually literally changed their name over the course of the last few years. The High Court heard in January how the pupil had alleged that the school's stance is, and I quote, the kind of discrimination which makes religious minorities feel alienated from society. The school's lawyers, meanwhile, argued that the policy was justified and proportionate, not least after it faced death and even bomb threats linked to religious observance on site. I think the court has got it right, and I think the school got it right. I have some sympathy for the pupil, especially if her position is coming from a place of devoutness as opposed to troublemaking stroke attention seeking, and I don't know. I'm just offering up some possibilities. And yet, implementing this rule seems to me to be likely to cause at least as many problems as it solves, if not more. 11:35 is the time. And I've got a very good Woke Watch. Should we do Woke Watch now? Should we do it now? So, yeah, go on then.
Woke Watch.
So, I have found a story. In fact, it's pretty prominent in the news today, but you probably didn't notice why it is the perfect Woke Watch. Arguably, Woke Watch has just reached critical mass because Donald Trump yesterday, on the first day of his criminal trial, as he becomes the first ever US president to stand criminal trial, he's charged with falsifying business records ahead of the 2016 election to cover up a $104,000 payment made to an adult film star called Stormy Daniels. The money was allegedly authorized to hide an affair with her and therefore to influence the election result. He has pleaded not guilty and he's denied having a relationship with Ms. Daniels. So what could Donald Trump, who I remind you frequently refers to Joe Biden as Sleepy Joe, how could Donald Trump have proved his anti-woke credentials in a way that is truly world-beating? What is the most anti-woke thing you could do in a courtroom? Yep. He fell asleep. He appeared to fall asleep several hours into the case. There's photographs of him apparently nodding off, which at least minimises... Actually, I fell asleep in a courtroom once. You can actually get into trouble with the judge for doing that. I'll tell you the story another time. It's not as exciting as it sounds. But he did apparently... The New York Times reported that Mr. Trump appeared to fall asleep hours into the trial with his head drooping before he jolted awake. Oh, isn't that awful? Do you know when you do that? When you jolt away? Oh, that's terrible, isn't it? He seemed more alert after lunch when he was seen talking animatedly with lawyers. So there is a new bar to be cleared for Woke Watch. If you want to prove your anti-woke credentials, there is nothing more effective than not being awake.
Woke Watch.
11:37 is the time. Back to the school and the story. Sernad is in Fulham. Sernad, what would you like to say?
Hi, mate. You're right. I just want to explain. my experience, and I think, like you've been saying, it's near impossible to justify how you can
Well, they're going to have to. They're going to have to. I think Kim did it all right. They'll just, I mean, what you can't stop happening is the kids coming back from suspension and then doing it all over again. You just have to hope they'll get bored at some point.
I'm a Muslim myself, so as I explained to your team, I went to a Catholic school, Church of England school, sorry. So during our times, we had Thursday Mass, etc., and there was a handful of Muslim students. They dealt with it really well. So this school, my school, dealt with it amazingly. So we would, of course, be obliged to go to Thursday Mass because there would be no one left in the school.
Sure.
We was able to sit in a separate room. We'd have activities, etc.
I don't want to sound uninterested, but so what? With respect, we're talking about a secular school that has no religion on the premises at all.
Exactly. So I'm saying, if a school which does have a religion, a prominent religion, deals with it in this way, we was able to have an extra time where we could pray. We could.
Yeah, but there's no one in this school can observe a religious ritual. You were at a Christian school that extended some tolerance or accommodation towards your different faith, but it's not, I mean, with respect, it's got absolutely nothing to do with the conversation that we're having. I'm glad that you had a happy experience at school, but we can't learn anything from that in the context of this case.
For some context on the children and why they decided to do the prayer. During our month of Ramadan, from sunrise to sunfall, we have to fast. And if you do not pray, if you do not meet the 5 daily prayers, your fasts are not accepted. However, I do agree with the fact that doing it in the playground maybe was the intention of slight attention seeking, and it wasn't. And
there were stories as well about some pressure being put on other Muslim pupils to join them, like kind of being told that they were not.
That's exactly how I feel about it. Even as a Muslim myself, I feel like even doing that in a playground in a secular school, it will open a bit of pressure towards the other students, maybe friends of the Muslims, and maybe they'll start to think, oh, we have to do this because our friends are doing this, etc. So I feel like the only way, especially during the month of Ramadan, was to accommodate them, because there's no other way. But you can do that
yourself, can't you? You can just take a quiet moment to say your prayers during Ramadan. You don't have to.
No, as a Muslim, there's certain rules that we need to follow. So we need to cleanse our body. We would also cleanse our hands, mouth, nose, etc. And then you do need to prostrate. So put your head to the ground and. Well, I don't. Then that way.
I mean, children as well.
Sorry?
Children as well.
Yeah, children. Well, not children. Above the age of 12, it is obligatory to pray.
So then we come back to the rules of the school, which, you know, if you are needing to observe that, this is not the school for you, because we don't. I mean, that is literally one of the founding principles of the school, is that we don't have religious rituals here. So you say to the parents, you do realise that they won't be able to 100%. Observe. And then we're back to where we started, aren't we?
I think it's being labelled as discrimination by a lot of Muslims. I don't think it is.
No, I don't either.
I think the way to deal with this, where it becomes discrimination is exclusion and suspension. That I think becomes.
Well, then you lead me to the question that I was going to ask you anyway, which is how on earth do you implement this rule then?
You can't. You can't, because we're.
Well, you can, except that you won't go to the place where you could, which is suspension or detention. What about detention? Is that okay?
No, it's not okay, because
you're saying you're being punished for praying.
Because the reason.
Yeah, but what if they were doing something else? You know, I mean, I'm not trivialising your faith. Well, I am actually I am trivialising your faith, because I'm going to compare it to a fidget spinner. But it's all faiths, right? When my kids were at primary school, they banned fidget spinners. Do you know what a fidget spinner is, Sir Ned?
Of course I know what a fidget spinner is.
Well, don't you say that. There'll be people listening who are going to have to look at it. So my children's primary school banned fidget spinners. So what's the difference? So you know, there are 30 kids over in the corner.
It's a way of life.
They're spinning their fidgets, or whatever the correct verb is. They're fidget spinning, and the teachers they're going to punish it. If you don't put your fidget spinners away, you're going into detention.
I don't think you can compare a fidget spinner and a religion and a faith.
No, you can compare 30 people convening in a playground to do something that's not allowed with 30 people convening in a playground to do something that's not allowed. Of course you can compare the two.
Of course, but something like a fidget spinner is something that these students think they're doing this for. Like, I can't even argue. I don't know how to argue a fidget spinner and religion. I don't think I would ever be asked that in my entire life.
No. Well, I don't think you ever will be again, actually, Sir Ned. But the point stands is that I'm asking how the school will impose this rule, and I'm now wondering whether it's actually any different to any other rule. So you might be the religious rebel, you might be the prayer rebel. And over there, it's the fidget spinner rebel. You know, so Spartacus, the fidget spinner Spartacus, is over in that corner, refusing to give up. You'll be like Charlton Heston. You take this fidget spinner from my cold, dead hand. And we need to be careful, especially at a secular school, not to give religion the status, or even, to coin a phrase, the reverence, of course, that many religious people demand for their religion. That's a secular school. If you don't like it, go to a school that's not secular. That sounds brutal, but I can't see another way through this. Terry's in Prestatyn. Terry, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise.
In Wales, my children go to a school that has mandatory prayer. All state schools in Wales have a mandatory moment of prayer or worship.
Yeah.
I'm an atheist. If I could send my children to a secular school, I would.
Right.
But I can't. We obey the rules. It's the same as any rule, whether it's uniform or time off for holiday. I think if you send your children to a school that has these rules, then you've got to obey the rules. Simple.
Well, but that's not the question. The question is, how do you impose this rule?
You'd impose it like you impose any rule, whether it's a uniform or I would let our religion work.
No, the phone line, mate. The phone line's gone all crackly. I don't know whether you've misunderstood the story or whether I've misunderstood you, but everyone's saying the rule's a great idea. We're just asking how you're going to actually implement it. And it's not like uniforms and other rules, because if this was a Christian kid being prevented from doing 10 rosaries every day during Lent, I'm pretty sure standing in the corner doing them out loud, as opposed to just sort of quietly making the act of devotion privately and unostentatiously, you'd have two quite different things going on. But yeah, I mean, the attraction of a secular school, you're denied it. I guess many parents don't live near schools where secular is an option. There is no earthly way that the children at this school wouldn't be able to find a place where they could go and observe their religious rituals, i.e. in a prayer room. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Not quite sure. Blanche is not happy. Blanche has been in touch to say, wow, what a pathetic woke watch. Do you know what, Blanche? I take your point. It was a bit left field, wasn't it? Trying to use the fact that Donald Trump fell asleep in court, as in wasn't woke. And yeah, it was more of a wake watch, Keith says. But well, woke and wake, it's the same thing, really. It's the same verb, isn't it? If awoke, awake, I awoke. But I take your point, Blanche. But, you know, I'm an adventurous man and a creative presenter. We're just normal men. I'm just a normal man. I'm just a creative. I just thought, you know, push the envelope. Blanche, no? Push the envelope a bit. But if it didn't work, it didn't work. There's no need to be mean. 11:49 is the time. How do you impose a rule like this? How do you solve a problem like Maria? And speaking of films, I know the difference between Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston. Sometimes I think you forget who you're listening to when you start sending in pedantic corrections. I did two separate references there. I talked about the fidget spinner Spartacus, which obviously is Kirk Douglas. And then I talked about Charlton Heston giving a speech to the NRA some years later, in which he talked about them having to prise his gun from his cold, dead hands. I was not getting Ben-Hur mixed up with Spartacus, albeit that they speak to a similar era and indeed similar politics. But that, so if you sit there and you think to yourself, oh, Claire's been in touch, says, oh, I see, I've only just got that woke watch now. Sorry, James. I don't know what's worse. If you have to explain it, it hasn't landed at all. Blanche got it and hated it. So the different, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, James has got Kirk Douglas mixed up with Charlton Heston, next time, what I would do if I were you, I'd think, is that really likely? Old show off there, old big head? Is he really likely to have got Charlton Heston mixed up with Kirk Douglas? I don't think so I won't send a snarky text, actually. I'll just presume it's me that's misunderstood as opposed to him that's misspoken. And then, of course, you can rewind on Global Player to find out whether or not my mistake actually happened or not. Liam says, did you do the woke watch? I got a phone call and had to turn the radio off. I did, Liam, but it wasn't great. Blanche thought it was rubbish. Pathetic is the word that she used. But you can rewind on Global Player, mate, if you want to go back. About 10 minutes, was it? more. Beginning of the half past. It came just straight off the back of the half past, I think. There you go, Liam. You're going to have a listen to it. I'll tell you what, Liam, go and have a listen to it. We'll carry on with the normal conversation and get back in touch. Let me know what you think. Because Blanche thought it was pathetic and Claire didn't even get it. I was quite pleased with it until I started reading these responses. 11:51 is the time. Em's in Manchester to steer us back to the grown-up conversation. What would you like to say, Em?
Hi.
Hello.
Right, so first of all, I just want to... So I'm a Muslim, and I think this is quite worrying, really, because we're talking about kids. And with kids, I think when you're stopping, especially when it comes to Britain, where we live in a multicultural, multi-religion society, and we're stopping kids from practicing their religion. So
no, we're stopping them from rituals, prayer rituals at a school that is, when you sign up to the school, you are told in no uncertain terms, this is a secular school.
Yeah, I understand that it's a secular school, but I'm going to use myself as an example because when I started working where I work, there was no prayer room, but
it wasn't a secular company when you signed up for it.
No, it wasn't.
So with respect, this isn't relevant.
School. Yeah, no, I understand that it's a secular school.
It doesn't go. Go on, carry on.
Did you say that there was like 50% Muslim population at the school?
Yep.
So this is where it becomes difficult.
And about 30 children were engaged in the prayer ritual.
Right, so 30 children. I think it initially started with one, you said, didn't you?
Yes.
It initially started with one, and there was a bit of pressure for the kids to get involved.
Reportedly, but the point is this: it's a school where no prayer rituals are allowed. That's why they don't have a prayer room. If you want to go to this school, you leave your religion at the door. That's the rule.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think this is where that point itself becomes difficult, because I think that you were talking about vulnerable children who in today's society, we've got a lot of Islamophobia, we've got a lot of anti-Semitism.
Which is why the school is secular, so that there isn't any Islamophobia or anti-Semitism allowed, because there isn't any Islam or Judaism or Christianity either. That's
fine. But when these children come out of school and they've been educated in a secular environment, then coming across these things is going to become alien to them.
Coming across what things?
In the work, so religion, because you can't take religion out of society. You're not going to take.
No, they don't just become Muslims when they arrive at school. I'm sure they go to mosque and Friday prayers. I'm not quite sure what you think you're saying to me, Em.
Right. The point I'm trying to make is that children need to be taught about these things in schools, in homes, in mosques, in churches.
Yes, they are. That's what happens in classrooms. That's not religious worship. That's religious education, that's
fine. But being a Muslim,
it's a legal requirement on the British curriculum. They're taught about all of it. Kim in Leeds is a religion teacher. She was on 10 minutes ago talking us through what the kids are taught at the schools.
Yeah, that's fine, but it's like what you said earlier. I'm sure we'd be looking at a whole different picture if it was in relation to a Christian child or
I think it might be, but I would still be on the side of the school that said you're not allowed to have a prayer ritual. There's not a lot of ritualistic worship in Christianity, but and there's certainly no requirement to do a rosary.
Yeah.
But the point is, the rule is this place is secular, so I don't know what you're confused about. If you want to do religious rituals, you've got to go somewhere else.
That's fine, and I totally understand that. Good. But I think when you have a secular environment, I think you're kind of restricting what the learning of what children.
Sorry, I'm going to sound a bit impatient with you now. They still teach religion at the school. They just don't let you worship in the playground.
That's fine, but I think children should be able to.
No, I hear you.
Absolutely,
but I can only explain it 17 times. That they are being taught about religion. They're just not allowed to pray in a ritualistic fashion in the playground. 17's my limit, Em. Becomes a you problem after that, not a me problem. Joseph's in Croydon. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi, yes. Basically, to impose the rule is you can change it, amend it. Rules are there to make things better, to control things, not to make them worse. From what I've seen with this school, is the school attitude that caused this big disruption. I agree, they can control it. I got my son, he goes to school, they let them pray in their lunch break, so it's their own time, and they give them small room, empty room.
Yes.
So that's it. And being a secular school, I think, doesn't give you a right to do any rules that you don't care. You just put your rules. For example, let's say there's a white school. Can you say that black people are not allowed. You can't do that.
Well, that's illegal.
So there is race discrimination. Same with religion. Prayer in a certain time for Muslim is obligatory.
No. It's not the same with religion.
Why not?
Well, first of all, no one's born.
There is religious discrimination.
But religion and race are not the same thing. And even if
there is discrimination for religion, right?
Well, there can be discrimination for religion, but not if all religions are being treated the same, Joseph.
But this is discrimination. You're not
How can it be discrimination? No one is allowed. Well, you can't really respond to a point until I finish making it. No religion is being discriminated against.
Yeah, you allow them or not. They allow girls.
Why is it with the phone lines today? This is like Guantanamo Bay for me. This phone. When the phone starts doing that, it's like sonic torture. There is no discrimination here. You join the school, you're told the rules. It doesn't matter whether you're a Zoroastrian, a Jedi Knight, a Muslim, a Jew, or a Christian. No rituals in the playground. Do you see, Joseph?
Yeah, cool. The head teacher.
Oh, there used to be fingernails on a black. What's happening there? That's 2 calls today. Well, that thing like a little wire has got... God, it drives me up the wall. I do apologise. Hussein is in Birmingham. Hussein, what would you like to say?
Can I say salam alaikum to you, James, which means peace be with you, everybody?
Salam alaikum. I know what it means. Peace be with you.
It's a shame it had to go to court. I mean, obviously...
well, it didn't, did it? She could have just done what she was told, like school children have had to do from time immemorial.
But what I would like to see, is why couldn't they have, like, the parents and teachers got around the table and say, okay, there needs to be a space in school during break times where anybody can go in and reflect and contemplate if they need to. You know, at the moment the schools are saying there's issues with anxiety and everything. So there could be a space for. I mean, to me, I look at it as let's take religion out of it. I look at that as a few minutes for just
I don't think
spiritual reflection,
I hear
contemplation.
You. No,
hold on. There's one more important.
Well, you're going to run out of time, and so I don't think you can take religion out of it.
It's mindfulness. That's all it was. Mindfulness.
I'm of a similar view with regard to religion. I mean, my personal experience is closer to meditative than it is to doctrinal. But the school is secular, and this is a ritual. This is kneeling on your blazer. This isn't mindfulness. This is a religious ritual, and the school doesn't allow them.
Well, I would say to you, it's a humanitarian thing. So yes. I would shake hands with you on that. Because you haven't got a lot of time and I haven't got a lot of time. But,
no, fine. Right. But the school has to be able to uphold its secularist principles. I mean, in many ways, I'm saying secularism should be respected and even revered as much or if not more than religion. It's the truly anti-discriminatory path down which to go. And if you were allowed to say a rosary and not allowed to do another type of prayer, or you're allowed to do your prayers while kneeling here but not allowed to say an Our Father out loud in public, then you'd have a very different problem. But I like this. I like this conversation. I like the way that it's gone as well. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thank you for trying, mate, said Adam. This is a conversation that will never be won. For once I didn't want to win. I just wanted everybody to understand why I was right.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Funny one, this. I thought that by now the conversation, or not even the conversation, but the issue would have gone in the opposite direction. I was teasing you a moment ago about not being wrong, never being wrong. I probably was wrong. I probably got James Dean and Marlon Brando mixed up today, but I definitely didn't get Kirk Douglas and Charlton Heston mixed up. You can use Global Player to rewind and listen again and double check that. But I got this wrong. I got this horribly wrong. Nobody died. It's not a major issue of embarrassment. But I honestly thought that by now the prevalence of vegetarianism and even veganism would have been really quite huge. I just felt... I don't know if you saw Simon Amstell's film. I love Simon Amstell. The man's a genius. And he made a film in 2017 called Carnage, which was set 50 years in the future. And the future world in 2067 was a place where carnism, as he called it, was banned. Everyone was a vegan. And not only had behaviour changed so completely, but there'd been a complete moral rewiring as well, so that young people would marvel, really, in disgust at the fact that people had ever killed and eaten animals. That there was a sort of support groups, if you like, for former carnists. It's a brilliant film. It's a really clever and at times quite beautiful film. And it posits, as I say, a future in which everybody is vegan, and not even reluctantly. You know, it's as if an enlightenment, that's the word. It's as if there'd been a sort of 21st century enlightenment on a scale with the religious enlightenment of the 19th century, but that this one was addressing the killing and eating of animals. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. And if you've listened to this programme for a few years, you'll have witnessed my changing attitudes to this story. You will have witnessed me be a bit of a... What's the best word you can say that's not a swear word to describe someone being a bit of a pillock? The wazzock's quite nice, isn't it? Is there a single syllable one? Being a bit of a plum. Plum's quite good, but I really, as a word, I really want to say, but I absolutely can't say it on the radio. And you would have witnessed me being a bit of a plum. Because I used to do that thing that a lot of silly men of my kind of background do when they feel a bit ashamed. I would come out on the attack. So I used to be really vicious towards vegetarians. And I'd do it in fun up to a point. But I'd realised some years later why I was doing it. And it was because I felt judged. I felt morally judged and I felt inferior. So somewhere deep inside, I knew that if you were eschewing the eating of meat, you were leading a... God, this isn't very good for the ego. You're all sending me suggestions now on what word I could have used a moment ago. And it looks like a critique of the programme. Dolt, Egypt, div. Div's good, because that sounds exactly like the word I really want to say. But you can stop now, because seriously, it might still be there when Sheila arrives and she'll get a complex. Stop sending rude words into the studio like that. It's just not very nice. And I felt judged. It took me ages to work this out. I wrote about it in my second book, which I won't be mentioning for a while because the paperback of my new book's out a week on Thursday, so I'll be driving that down your throat for the foreseeable future. I realised that even if you were a nice non-evangelical vegetarian, you know, you weren't like inflicting your worldview on me or calling me, a caller once called me a corpse-eating psychopath, I think, and not in fun either, a corpse-eating psychopath. But I kind of knew somewhere deep inside that you were leading a more righteous life than I was, yeah, if you were vegetarian. Never quite went there with veganism, largely because of honey. But with vegetarianism, I kind of knew that you were leading a more righteous life than I was. And because of that, and because of my sort of psychological conditioning as a youngster and the way my survival personality developed at boarding school, if I felt that you were judging me, or if I felt that you were leading a more righteous life than me, my impulse was to come out swinging. If you don't understand what I'm describing, have a look at politicians. Have a look at public school educated politicians and how good they are at sitting with being wrong. I don't know if you saw footage of Boris Johnson in America earlier this week being confronted by an American student, I think at Georgetown University, with irrefutable evidence of his contempt for the things he was claiming to uphold. So he would talk about the rule of law, he would talk about the importance of democracy, and this American student pointed out that he prorogued Parliament unlawfully, that he was a beneficiary of interference in our democratic processes by foreign countries, and rather than just sitting there talking about it, Johnson just went, "Oh, rhubarb." I was like, the inability to contemplate the possibility that person over there might be A, right, but B, better than you. So I'd be one of those people that would say things like, "Oh well, I bet you wear leather shoes, don't you?" Like, oh, what a zinger! You've really shown me. Oh, yes, James, well done. I'm going to go home and eat an enormous sausage because I'm wearing leather shoes. But I don't. I mean, this is what these minds are like, and I'm quite good at this because I used to have one. I used to be like, oh, I bet you wear, it's all very well not eating meat, but I bet you wear a leather belt. Like, so what? It's got nothing to do. I don't want to eat animals, right? Well, why do you wear them then? Well, some people don't. Some people do. It's not even relevant to my vegetarian. But I thought that was a genius. I had another one. I had a great one. So, well, when we got married, we had to provide a vegetarian option for our vegetarian friends. But when they got married, they didn't provide a meat option. I thought that was hilarious, and I kind of meant it. I had this weird, like I say, a sort of shame type feeling. And so I thought, and indeed I said to you, that by the time I was 60, 50 even, maybe 55, I'd probably be more or less vegetarian. And I eat a lot less meat than I used to, but that's a health thing. That's a red meat thing. And it's all the doctors say eat less red meat, don't they? What I did not expect was the numbers effectively to go into reverse, to see a widespread rejection of vegan products. Now, that's because they're ultra-processed. It's got nothing to do necessarily with people deciding that they don't want to be vegans anymore. But some of the unhealthiest food you can eat is the stuff in the vegan aisle. And as we've discussed on the programme before, the vegan aisle itself has shrunk enormously over the last few years. But there is a sense that vegetarianism is going into retreat. So it's actually gone down, not by a lot. But I asked Eleanor, the producer, to check, because I felt that we were anecdotally confident that vegetarianism was declining. But could we possibly establish whether there is statistical support for the idea that vegetarianism is declining? And guess what? There is. Guess what? There is. Veganism has gone up a bit, but the numbers are much smaller. Vegetarianism has gone down from 3.4 million to 3.1, which is quite a lot. I think in the context of the broader, it's about 6-7% drop at a time when I honestly thought that the numbers would be going up. Even if you bring in pescatarians and vegans and make a case for arguing that some of the vegetarians have actually stopped being vegetarian but they've become vegan, what you're not seeing is what I thought would happen when I watched Simon's film. When the film Carnage posited a future not that far hence in which eating meat would be akin to, well, I don't know what it would be akin to. What did we used to do? Sending kids up chimneys. There you go. That's always a good reach at times like this. It would be looked back upon slavery. I'm not making light of slavery, but it would be looked back upon with utter horror and disgust. And then I open the newspaper today and find a story which I've subsequently managed to lose, telling me that vegan food products, as in specifically processed vegan food products, are among the least healthy foods that you can eat. And that's another reason why the appeal, the sheen, if you like, of vegan and vegetarian lifestyles has started to tarnish. And I just want to have a look at it. I want to have a look at the why of it as well. I want to have a look at the why of it. Why? Why has vegetarianism stalled as a national phenomenon? So there's two ways into this. There is your story, why you've given it up, why you've gone backwards. But the broader story as to why it's stalled, if not reversed, and I think it's probably reversed, but let's just say stalled. I genuinely thought, I must have told you 1,000 times that with each passing year, from about, when did I start therapy? About 2018, was it? 2017, 2018, maybe a bit earlier. And that's when I started examining opinions I held that were either obnoxious or just odd. Why would you care about what vegetarians do? And I worked out where it came from. So from about that point there, smoking's quite a good example, actually, of you look back on. But anyway, from about that point onwards, I expected vegetarianism to increase exponentially. And I thought it would be like going bankrupt in The Great Gatsby. I thought it would start slowly and then happen quickly. That each year the numbers would go up by a bit, but they'd go up by a bit more the next year. So if they went up by 1% or 2% or 10% in 2018, they'd go up by 11% or 12% in 2019. I honestly thought, and I think you did too, I honestly thought that vegetarianism would begin to sweep the country. And I thought I'd be part of it. I have vegetarians at home, but they no longer are vegetarian completely. Still very healthy and careful eaters, but there was medical advice involved in one case. So why do you think vegetarianism as a lifestyle choice has stalled? And remember, you don't have to be a vegetarian to answer that question. Some people might want to ring in with their personal reasons for abandoning vegetarianism. Try not to call me a corpse-eating psychopath, please, on a Tuesday. I've got rules. But the rest of us can, because I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why this lifestyle choice has at least stalled and at most started to reverse, when all of the evidence suggested to me that it would go in the opposite direction. I'm being very pernickety today with critiques on Twitter. Steve's been in touch, so the word you were looking for was exponential. It wasn't really exponential, the word I was looking for. I guess overall, I thought it would be incremental, Steve, but increasing with each year. And the opposite is true. Certainly in the last 12 months, it's gone down, not up at all. And I don't know why. And I really want you to think about this. Why? You watch a film like Carnage, and the case that is made by passionate advocates like Simon Amstel is irresistible, a truly irresistible case. I remember listening to Meat is Murder by Morrissey or the Smiths back in the day, and I became a vegetarian for about 36 hours. And then it was beef burgers at boarding school, and it was one of the few meals that they could actually serve up in a vaguely decent way. So I'm afraid that I abandoned it. But you just felt that the world was going in that direction, didn't you? And it appears that it is not. And I want you to tell me why. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time is 12:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 12. And actually, rather fortuitously, you've reminded me that today is the day that my friend Andreas opens his new restaurant in Chelsea. You've heard from Andreas on Matters Green Grocery a few times on the programme, a very helpful guide to the difficulties of bringing food into the country. His greengrocer, which is on Chelsea Green, on Cale Street in Chelsea, is it the most extraordinary shop. I mean, it is probably the most beautiful shop, certainly the most beautiful greengrocers in the country, if not the world. And they're just opening a little restaurant today, literally today, next door, called Cale Street with a K. Do you see that? So it's on Cale Street with a C, but it's a restaurant, part of a greengrocer's empire, next to the greengrocer's shop. So it's called Cale Street with a K. It's clever, that, with a C. And I had a sneak preview of some of the dishes on that menu, and I can tell you now, I've posted some pictures of them, actually. Absolutely beautiful food. Some of the best food I've ever eaten. And I would, if you get the chance, treat yourself, head down there. And good luck to Andreas and Sophia and everybody, the whole family, Wilbur and Tilly. And it's going to be a fantastic, fantastic place. And I'm very privileged to have had a sneak preview. And I mention that because I eat a lot more vegetables now, and indeed fruit, than I did when I first met him, when we moved to Chiswick 100 million years ago. But I haven't given up meat altogether. And I thought by now I might have done. And vegetarianism in general is in decline, and I want you to tell me why. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. Rick's in Sheffield. Rick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So there's a couple of thoughts I've got about this. So I've been vegan for maybe 8 to 9 years and vegetarian for about 10 years before that. Many of my friends have followed me in one way or another. And I think part of the answer to your question is it kind of lies in the methodology of the kind of answers you've given, or the facts you've given.
Go on.
Things like vegan and vegetarian have quite a technical definition that many modern words blur almost on purpose to make it either more palatable or more flexible. And that flexibility is the key. Vegan definitely has a moral choice bound into it. And so, for example, you, for moral reasons, shouldn't be wearing leather belts according to your previous conversations about it, right? That's a moral choice. Whereas the health-based benefits, and many people follow what's called a plant-based whole food diet, which is essentially vegan with all of the rubbish taken out of it, so no processed burgers and so on and so forth. But there is a caveat to that. An average plant-based diet might allow you to, quite within the realms of health, allow you to have, Granny's turkey roast once a month.
So what you're describing is a decline in what we could describe as ideological vegetarianism.
I think so, and I think that both health. Why? Because I think people find it too difficult.
Why is that declining? Because it didn't used to be.
I think it's.
I mean, that was what defined it, wasn't it? It was. I mean, that's why perhaps people like me were idiots towards vegetarians, because there was an earnestness and an even evangelical zeal about it. I'm not going to kill and eat animals. It was all about the animals' welfare.
Well, let me get stuff for you. Let's just take some numbers out of the air. I'm not saying this is the real numbers, but let's make the maths easy. Let's say 10% of people have that ideological zeal you're talking about.
Right.
Okay. And then 30% also have an interest in it, but they struggle to have that evangelical nature of it. They're very interested in making it better. Maybe it's 50%. The point is, those people wouldn't tick the box, I'm a vegetarian or I'm a vegan. Okay, because they're not.
No, I know, but you're not. No, hang on. With respect, I understand what you're doing. You're sort of theoretical number crunching, but I'm really interested in the thought process about why it is now less likely that somebody is going to develop a profound antipathy towards the idea of eating flesh, the flesh of a dead animal. And the language used to be so emotive. Why is that declining?
I don't think the antipathy has declined. I think the evangelical zeal with which you reject it has. So the difficulty you face where you are an evangelical going to Granny's roast, you might just say, do you know what? Once this one time, I'm not going to be that difficult.
No, but that means that you're not repulsed by the thought of flesh.
Well, I agree, and I don't think many of the people who initially entered the argument were actually that into it.
Okay, well, that works. That's an actual answer to my question.
Sorry if I wasn't clear, James.
No, that's fine. It's my fault.
And I think very much like people who get into, might be religion, it might be a new form of music. These people, it becomes their life for a while, and they become not sick of it, but like the gloss or the sheen or the difficulties become apparent. And
that just doesn't necessarily hold true, because the next generation should be taking up the mantle of earnestness. John puts it like this: what puts me off veganism and vegetarianism is I find them all so preachy, holier than thou, and totally sanctimonious people. I don't agree with you anymore on that, John. I think Rick's probably right. That sense seems to be in retreat, but historically that's how people have been typified. And why wouldn't the next generation coming up just take up the mantle, even if the people you're talking about have dialed it down a bit? Why aren't the new lot as annoying as the old lot were?
I think the problem is you're looking at this kind of like all-in point of view. I think more people are actually 50% vegan vegetarian.
So there's probably less meat being eaten and fewer vegetarians, self-identified or self-declared vegetarians.
Exactly, because of the moral point I'm making. The amount of people who've cut meat out for health reasons. I mean, it's a type 2 carcinogen, for example. Yeah. That is now common knowledge, whereas it wasn't before. Processed meat's a type 1A carcinogen. It's really bad for your health. People go, do you know what? I'm going to save that for Christmas. That means I'm not vegan, but I've eaten a lot less meat. And thus, the kind of the greater cause is still advancing.
Okay, no, I get it.
The cause is behind.
Yeah, I hear you. It's not a definitive answer, but I don't think there is a definitive answer on this. And yet that sense that the journey, the direction of traffic is the opposite of what I expected. You're sort of nibbling around the edges of the overall phenomenon. I thought by now, if you pardon the pun in a conversation about eating, I thought by now that there would be a really big proportion of the population who were ideological vegetarians, that the moral objection to the consumption of the flesh of a killed mammal, a slaughtered mammal or a slaughtered fish, I thought that would have gathered pace, and it hasn't. It's lost momentum, and I don't understand why. The specifics of it you've pinned down, but not necessarily the principles of it, I think. Alex is in Nottingham. Alex, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Nice to speak to you again. I just wanted to give you a personal perspective on this. I can't speak for everyone else, but I'm someone who absolutely adores animals. I've made my life about animals, becoming a veterinary surgeon. And when I was 14, I remember sitting in a social studies class, and we were talking about the ethics of eating meat. And I remember just someone saying, well, if we really cared about animals, we wouldn't eat them, would we? And I remember sitting up and thinking, well, yeah, I love animals. I'm going to stop eating meat. And my older sister was vegetarian, so that made it a little easier at the time. And so I didn't eat meat for 10 years.
Okay.
After that.
And you meant it. You really, if you'd accidentally eaten a bit of chicken, you'd start palpitating, would you? Or
no, nothing like that. I mean, I was never
people
keen
did.
on
I knew
meat in the
people like
first
that at
place.
college. It's, oh my God, I think there's some meat on my pizza. It's accidentally put, and then you'd go to somewhere like Greece and they'd think, oh, well, it's only chicken, it's not really meat. You can have a bit of chicken, can't you? So you weren't like a hardcore vegetarian, as it were.
I wasn't repulsed by it. I never liked meat, so I was never, I could murder a steak or something like that.
Yes.
I didn't really like it as a kid, so
Fair
it was
enough.
in that way quite easy. I did still eat fish, to be fair, because it was a lot easier for my family to sort of get to grips with.
Yes, of course, yeah.
I
All the mums and
eat that.
dads now, particularly mums, because they did more of the cooking back in the day, didn't they? But imagine now we've got to serve up 3 different meals for every family member. It's like flipping Claridge's.
Exactly. So, I was quite happy, and I liked all the vegetarian products like corn or just eating vegetables and things like that. That was fine. And then I went to vet school, and the first year of vet school, we have to do a lot of animal husbandry placements. So we get put out at pig farms and dairy farms and all that. And it was my lambing placement. And they also had beef cattle as well. And I had to live on the farm, and I had to eat what I was given by the farmer's wife.
Yes.
Which was, incredible food.
Could you not have said, I'm terribly sorry, I'm a vegetarian?
I'm not very good with confrontation, and I have quite high anxiety, so I really didn't want to offend these people. So I did sort of...
Have you watched All Creatures Great and Small? It reminded me of James Herriot turning up at a farmer's and being served some lump of something almost unidentifiable and just sort of very politely nibbling away at it and pushing it around his plate with lots of piccalilli.
I felt really uncomfortable about it, but actually the time I stayed with them, I realised how much these people loved the animals that they worked with, how much they cared for them. We had little lambs that, were rejected by their mothers, and, economically they could have sort of knocked them on the head and said, no, we can't have them. But they hand-reared them. I helped hand-rear them because they didn't want to lose them. And they wanted to do the best by them, and they really cared for their welfare. And I came to a realization that I wanted to actually support farmers like them. And
I like this. I mean, there's a bit we're late for the news. That's the only reason I'm interrupting you. That and the fact that I interrupt people all the time. But that'd be counterintuitive. I want to look after these animals by killing them and eating them. But I do actually understand exactly what you say.
But everything has to die, and I think if we can give them a good life and a good death, that's actually far more important.
No, I agree with you. So you're right. It's a very personal journey, and it's an instructive one and an interesting one, and one that I bet an awful lot of people have been on, if not with the extremities of actually working as a vet on a working farm. But it doesn't address the question of why that ideological commitment has diminished at a time when all of the augurs and omens seem to me to suggest that it would increase. Maybe, as Rick in Sheffield suggested, maybe it wasn't actually that deep after all. It's just the only ones you ever heard from were the ones possessed of the very ideological and strident positions. Most vegetarians, like Alex, were either doing it just quietly getting on with it, and not, the phrase we always used to use at the time, is not shoving it down everybody else's throat. 12:31 is the time. Tim Humphrey is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I think we might have accidentally stumbled into something a moment ago. And the vegetarianism got appalling PR because the only vegetarians you ever heard from were the ones that were always telling everybody else off. But the average vegetarian experience was a much milder process, and therefore to resile from it, to start eating a bit of meat again, or to change your habits slightly, is actually not as shocking as it initially appeared. The story that prompted my interest in it today is one about going vegan, not improving your health, vegan food being worse for your health than eating real meat. It's not true of all vegan products. Of course it's not, but it is a study undertaken at Bournemouth University. The co-author, Dr. Sumanto Halder, a lecturer in nutrition science, said the end products can be high in salt, saturated fat and additives in order to match the taste and texture of real meat products. But she adds, it is clear that, or he adds, it is clear that there are still a lot of opportunities for improvements to justify perceptions of superior health benefits. So they looked at blood pressure, cholesterol, other health issues, and then looked at the diet, and going vegan didn't improve or offer any clear heart benefits or result in higher blood pressure or lower blood pressure than, in fact, they thought it might possibly have put blood pressure up. That's probably because of salt, isn't it? According to a study. So that's why we're looking at it today. Neil Rankin, who you will know off the telly and elsewhere, is now running a vegan food company or a fermented plants company, Neil, but you used to be the king of steaks.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk to you for hours on this.
What's happened? Well, I mean, talk about your own change. I looked at the vegan food, the products around about 4 years ago, and this is why I got into the space, because they were rubbish, you know, and it was also the sort of processed stuff. And I think largely the whole scene and the sort of bubble of veganism has kind of been promoted by those sorts of products that really just got pumped into our supermarkets and our food system. And this huge thing, and all run by sort of big corporate food manufacturers. You know, I mean, I was this little guy, you know, a chef trying to make these things in a really nice way. Our stuff isn't high in saturated fat. It's really, really low. It's really good for you. It's just made with fermented vegetables. And that's sort of taking off now. And there's sort of, I suppose, the sort of 2.0 version, and people are wanting sort of clean label stuff. But, and what? Because I think with the first stuff, and your company is Simplicity with a Y, isn't it? With two Y's and two I's, SYMPLICITY. And I think what you described with the first rush, and possibly the reason why everybody got a bit carried away, was because it was so convincing. You know, you'd go and buy.
I think it's quite cool, though. I mean, it's quite interesting. You know, I mean,
but you'd buy a burger and you couldn't believe it wasn't meat. So that, but the second part of that conversation is, well, what is it then? And now we've got to that bit, whereas we weren't there for quite a long time. And when you get to the, well, what is it then? That's when the headlines start appearing saying vegan food is actually worse for your health than eating real meat, like I'm reading today in the Daily Mail.
And I think it doesn't answer any questions. I think people want cheaper food, which you're not going to get that with a lot of vegan meat alternative products because we don't have subsidies. So if you took the subsidies off meat, we'd be level, if not cheaper. But at the moment, you know, there's so much subsidies goes into meat. It's like an unwinnable battle, and the meat industry is so big, you know, trying to stop us from calling things certain names and things like that. So, but that aside, I think people just want good food, and they want it at a reasonable cost, and they want it to be convenient. Now, plant-based food without meat alternatives and things like that it's not that easy to do that diet. You know, it's a very difficult diet to do, and I think it's not convenient for people. So they do need these meat alternatives, but what they don't need is these meat alternatives made by these big food processing companies that just make crap for very little money. You know, and I think that's what's sort of driven this, and the supermarkets are now reacting to that because they've seen people just push back off that.
And they have, and they've withdrawn ranges and taken away shelf space. Was your shift actually more business opportunity, more spotting a space than it was anything born of a Damascene conversion from your days when you were running the smokehouse around the corner from me, and you could go in there and you could almost order a steak by name in that restaurant. You could say, I want that cow that was in that field at 4:10 last Tuesday. Did you have a sort of a principle shift, or did you?
No, I was just interested in it. I think from a creative chef background, I was just quite interested in the idea of creating something out of this. And when I came up with this, I thought this was going to be the gold star moment for me. I thought this was going to be, you know, all ticks in my homework jotter. I thought, like, the press were going to go wild and go, oh my God, he's created this thing that tastes like a McDonald's and has no saturated fat. It's really good for you. But no, it's like tumbleweed. Nobody cares.
It's baby steps, though. Tom Kerridge has described your stuff as above everything and everyone else in the marketplace. So it's picking up momentum now, isn't it? It
is. But I think the trouble is the whole scene has just been so flooded with this stuff.
Yeah.
And we get put on the same category as all those other guys. I won't mention them, but all these other companies that are using it, and we're on the same menu. So if you go into one of the pubs, we're in most of the Premiership League football clubs.
Okay.
We're in the pie fillings and things like that. But on those menus, it won't mention us, it won't mention what goes on it. It'll generally just mention that it's plant-based.
But it's
people
so we need a league table of plant-based now, don't we, really?
We just need more good people coming into the industry.
If you've got Tim Spector, I'm just looking at your website now. Tim Spector is, he's everywhere at the moment. He's describing it as the future of food. He says, I truly believe this is the future of food. So you'd think that the retailers would be pushing that, wouldn't you?
You think, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But it's not so much happening, and I think it's a bit of hurt just from this category just not doing well initially. But it's a bubble, It's like anything. It's like electric cars 15 years ago were rubbish. I remember the Sinclair C5. These things actually had to dance and drive themselves before we stood up and took notice. And I think the same's going to happen with plant-based. It's just the wrong time to judge it. I think it's going to take a bit of time to flower. And it will get there.
And when it happens, it will be more from pragmatism than
100%. And it'll be from a good place. At the moment, it's just coming from people trying to make money out of it.
I hear you.
I'm sort of glad it's failed in that sense.
Sure. And to clarify, what you do differently from what all the others do is use fermented plants and not the traditional constituents of heavily processed food. So it's just much.
Ours is a health food, which also goes on sort of.
Well, it's surprising they don't push that angle of it more. Well, thank you, Neil. Always a pleasure.
All right.
I'm enjoying your website as well now. I'm getting distracted by it. So whoever put that together for you has done a bang-up job. 12:42 is the time. Neil's company, Simplicity with a Y, changing the face. Some of the testimonials here are absolutely Premier League. Not literally. Cabell is in Croydon. Cabell, what would you like to say?
So basically, I agree with the last caller. I think there's two types of people, different types of people that got into veganism or vegetarianism. I got into it because of health reasons. I felt that the meat that was pushed out, there was too much of it. The supply and demand and the things that they were putting in the meat wasn't good for my health. And I feel like once this vegan movement, I call it a movement, came into place, I think a lot of people started flocking to that, maybe for the wrong reasons or maybe just because they felt cool being in the vegan movement. And I think, like the last caller said, big companies now see that and it's about selling. So it's like, okay, now we've got all these vegans and people that don't want to eat meat. How can we conveniently push out our products in the market and get them sold? They don't really care about what's in their products. It's just about getting them sold in the supermarket.
This is the new thing, and we've got to get in on the ground floor and make some serious moolah.
Right.
And that's how we've ended up not prioritising health, but instead simply prioritising meat-free, as it were, or absence of meat, which is not what a consumer like you, or indeed like Neil, wants.
Yeah. Exactly that. So that's why, to answer your question, I feel like maybe the numbers are going down now. Because if I've got a box to tick, people will ask me, "Am I a vegan?" And I actually say, "No, I'm not a vegan." Like I try and eat as healthy as possible. I'd maybe say plant-based, even where my.
But you're not morally opposed to eating meat.
I'm not morally opposed to it. No. I'm not morally opposed to it.
I would just rather not.
Production of it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So where I'm from, Jamaica, they have there's Rastafarians that have been eating ital, and that is just food from the ground, plant-based food. And even in Jamaica, they eat chicken and stuff like that. And I wouldn't oppose to it because they farm it and it's from their farm. And the only reason I stopped eating it is just because of the mass production of it and what they have to do in order to put it on our shelves and keep it fresh on our shelves.
That's a really interesting point about provenance. As the more interest you take in where food comes from, the more naturally you will turn away from some meat products and some processed meat and even sort of intensively farmed meat. But it's not a moral objection to the consumption of meat. It's a pragmatic objection to the mode of production of that particular type of meat or that particular meat product. Thank you, Cabell. That's fascinating. This is nice from Jenny as well. She goes, I've watched 4 of my nieces, now aged between 27 and 32, all give up vegetarianism as they prepared and paid for food themselves and so became more knowledgeable regarding nutrition and the need for sustenance to do a day's work. Come on, you can. There's plenty of vegetarians. There's vegetarian powerlifters, But I take your point. It's a heck of a lot easier to get a balanced diet, protein-wise, down your neck if you're eating meat than it is if you're not. But it's not by no means impossible or even necessarily that difficult. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know, how do you pronounce it again? Cavolo. I put Cavolo Nero in my smoothie this morning. And it's very interesting. Just mention this. It's a very vegetarian smoothie because the thing about smoothies is that you have to be careful that you're not just drinking fruit sugar, fructose. So a smoothie has fibre in it. So sometimes you go to a juice bar, you get a nice juice, but it's actually not that good for you, juice. But a smoothie where you actually mush up all the vegetables, much better for you because it's got the fibre in it. But I've never put, that posh cabbage, as I call it, Cavolo Nero. I've never put posh cabbage. Do you know why I bought the posh cabbage? Because I want to make crisps in the air fryer. And someone told me you can make really delicious crisps out of Cavolo Nero in the air fryer. But I haven't tried that yet. I'll let you know how I get on. That's just a bit of a diversion from our conversation about vegetarianism. Just some insights into my own culinary habits and diet. But why has vegetarianism stalled as a lifestyle choice? Peter's in Watford. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Peter.
I've been veggie or vegan for probably, 10 or 12 years now. I think I've always struggled with the label of veganism because, I'm mostly vegan. I will occasionally a bit of a dairy if I'm out,
Sure.
But
cheese,
vegan
is it?
Mostly, exactly, or a bit of milk and pastries and things.
Yeah.
But
cheese, man.
But
Life without
I'm
cheese.
Vegan I know, right? It's difficult.
Oh.
There's environmental, moral, and health reasons. So if you just stick everyone in the one vegan category for different reasons, I think there's still that view, as someone else said before, sort of viewing vegans as quite militant.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of, I was at a restaurant and someone just waved a meat under my wife's nose and she hadn't said anything about it,
Yeah.
People still have that confrontation like you were talking about and about leather belts and things. And I think that's the problem, is that simple label. I make my own choices and I'm comfortable with how vegan I am.
Right.
And I think that's probably more where more people are. I know anecdotally a lot of people, they would have had meat with every dinner. Maybe they eat vegetarian dinners 3-4 days a week now.
Yes.
Anecdotally, I know a lot of people in that way. And I think I'm not sure of the exact data you've been talking about, but I think that's the big problem, is the label of veganism still has those connotations of
also, you wouldn't tick the box, would you, if you are flexible?
That's right. I'm not 100% vegan. That's right. Yeah. Even though at home I'm vegan, but out, I will be a bit flexible. And if I'm around at somebody's house and they've stuck some cheese in a dish, that's fine. I'll eat it.
I think what we've done, we've talked about this issue and attendant issues quite a few times. But the great thing about people like you and the callers today is that we generally end up sometimes coming across things we haven't come across before. So part of the problem here, I always begin it by describing the dipstick who was me. I wouldn't have waved meat under your wife's nose, but I would have said obnoxious things because deep down, I felt that you were leading a more righteous life than me, and that made me feel shame, and my shame articulated itself as aggression, and I ended up saying things to you that could have been construed as rude. But actually, the debate was dominated by people like that and the vegetarian equivalent of people like that, people who were constantly telling other people how they should live their life and making other people feel bad. And the normal vegetarian experience would be much closer to yours. I choose not to eat meat, and I also choose not to eat anything that's come from an animal. But if if push comes to shove, I'm not going to make a big song and dance about it at somebody else's house. So So that's part of the problem, is that the debate, as often happens with public debate, it's been dominated by the loudest voices who were not necessarily the most representative.
I think that's probably right.
That's today's breakthrough, Peter. What do you miss most? You see, is that an aggressive question?
No, not at all. I think what you said, cheese has been really hard.
Man.
And for a long time, vegan cheeses were just awful. But there's one, am I allowed? I don't know.
Yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. People will be fascinated.
Have brought one out which is the best one I've found in the
Cathedral
shop.
City.
And it's okay. But I mean, it's not the same as you have the variety. You have
mate. I tell you, I went into Paxton and Whitfield the other day on Jermyn Street, and it is like cheese heaven. It really. Even if I was tempted by veganism, I would find that almost impossible. And I have to tell you that Andreas's shop in Chelsea, which I was raving about earlier, was. I just got some of the food in there is just off the charts delicious as well. And a few of you asking about Neil's company. I did mention it, but I shall mention it again. It's very straightforward. It's simplicity, but with a Y. So simplicity with a Y, and that is food made from fermented vegetables, the whole range of what you'd expect: burgers, sausages, mince, meatballs, and sauces as well. Really up and down the country now it's available. There's a helpful map on the website where you can have a look at stockists. 12:54 is the time. Karen is in Exeter. Karen, what would you like to say?
Hello. Lovely to speak with you.
Likewise.
I'm a little bit nervous.
It's only me. It's only me.
You're like my hero.
Oh, stop it. Thank you.
Apart from the fact that you're not vegan.
Yes, apart from... Well, nobody's perfect, Karen, eh?
Absolutely. So I've been vegan for 20 years. And during that time, I've seen a lot of change, and I think a few years ago, it was kind of quite trendy, to be vegan. Look, even young children were vegan.
Yeah,
I was quite amazed. And I did think at the time, I'm not sure this will last, this wave. But
why do you think that stopped? Why do you think it's gone into...
The thing is that veganism is about compassion. It's about compassion to all living things. It's,
But you see, Karen, as soon as you say that,
as
soon as you say that,
yeah,
people like, not so much now me, but old me starts bridling because I think you're calling me uncompassionate.
I can understand that. And it really is about being non-judgmental, and personally, the way I deal with it is by thinking I can't control the actions of others. I can't do that. So I don't look at people. I just think if people had to go to an abattoir and actually see what happens, then and know.
And then I won't eat meat from that. I won't eat meat from there. I'll eat meat from somewhere else. I'll eat meat from somewhere but more humane,
I know.
It's like there was a caller on earlier who was a vet, and she literally gave up vegetarianism when she was working on a beef farm.
But the thing is, James, all animals end up in the abattoir. They all die in the same way.
Everything dies
one day. And if you knew that pet, that animal, as I've got a dog.
Yes.
If I had to take her to the abattoir, she was bolted in the head and her throat was slit.
Yes. We should have done a trigger warning there. People might be having their lunch.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. But this is you're quite an old. So in a sentence there, because you're quite old school vegan. You sound like you sound like you would have sounded if you'd rung me 20 years ago. You haven't shifted an inch. Why do you think the numbers have stopped? Why do you think vegetarianism?
I think it's the political arena. I think that it's the fact that people are that they are struggling.
So the cost.
Think about being vegan when they can hardly, they're trying to get through difficult jobs, 0 contract hours, all the hard stuff, trying to pay their gas
that's
bill.
Compassion. You sound compassionate now.
Well, I am compassionate.
I know you are. I'm just saying you're sounding it. You say, so you think it's a cost thing? You think that it's actually harder work to be a vegan or to be a vegetarian?
No, I just think people are struggling and they do not have the time and the energy in there.
I just said it's harder work. That's all right, Karen.
Well, it is.
It is. No, I've got it. Anyway, Sheila's here. I've got to go.
I just
carry on.
To say,
yes.
Dr. Grieger, Dr. Alan Desmond, they're the plant-based gurus, whole food, and that I'm 58 and my blood pressure is lower than the people that I work with in their 30s.
Well, you can't argue with that. That's not an opinion, is it, Karen? That's counting. Can I ask you a question?
A lot younger.
Can I ask you? Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah. Go.
Did this live up to your expectations? This contribution to the programme? Calling
Yes.
in. Did it? Thank you.
Yeah.
How lovely.
Thanks
I'm
so
so
much.
glad. I'm very relieved, Karen. Thank you. Oh, if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, which is, the official LBC app. You can also pause and rewind live radio there. And if you do rewind judiciously, you'll realise that I didn't make any of the mistakes today that you accused me of, except possibly the James Dean Marlon Brando one, but definitely not the Kirk Douglas Charlton Heston one. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.